All right, welcome to another episode of Seize the Moment podcast. And today we want to welcome back a special guest. We have Ryan Stelzer. He's a management consultant, executive coach, entrepreneur, and author who co-founded Strategy of Mind alongside Dr. David Brendel to build high-performing human teams. Ryan served at the White House as a presidential management fellow during the Obama administration, where his team was responsible for improving and sustaining high levels of performance across federal agencies. His new book, co-authored with Dr. David Brendel, is called Think, Talk, Create, Building Workplaces Fit for Humans. Welcome, Ryan.
Thank you guys for having me.
Absolutely, man. And so to start off, one of my favorite stories of the book, right? I think probably the best story in the book. I mean, obviously it's my opinion, but I think it's true. So really about the Islanders, man. So that was probably one of the most, So, you kind of find a lot of times in these books, and this is not necessarily a knock on philosophy because I get it and it works, right? They kind of talk about abstract ideas. They tell you how to apply certain ideas. They tell you maybe like one example, like maybe even a couple of examples, right? But they don't really go in depth in terms of story, kind of narration and storytelling. So what I really appreciated about this book is the fact that there's so many stories, but in particular, this is a story I didn't even really know about before. So can you tell us about the Islanders?
Yeah, well, first of all, I wanted to just say that when you said you had a favorite story, I was hoping it was one of my stories, but that's actually one of David's stories. So he gets
interesting
for telling. He is a devoted Islanders fan, as are his sons, and Isaac in particular. His eldest son is just his room is blue and orange and wears Islanders clothing only, and they are the truest Islanders fans that exist. So shout out to those guys for their fandom, and David coming up with this story and putting it in the book. And so yeah, the long story short is it's a great example of how connecting with the emotions of your fan base can help you potentially succeed as a franchise. The really, really quick version of the story is that the Islanders have this passionate, small but passionate fan base on Long Island. And there's the Coliseum, which is sort of this religious center for those sports fans who love going to the Islanders games. And the organization made a decision to move closer to the city, the big city, for money and for financial purposes. And the Islanders actually started to struggle in their performance as a team. So they were struggling to win games, and there was this sort of magical ability for the old Coliseum, that the old barn is as it was referred to by fans, for them to play well when they're in this state, in this unique arena out in the middle of Long Island. So when they would play games in this sort of hybrid season, both in the city and out on the middle of Long Island, their performance actually was notably improved when they were playing on this sort of home ice and at the old barn. And it was because of the just sort of the rabid fan base that was there supporting them, and they felt sort of the emotional investment in playing better. And we can get into the psychology of it all, but the long story short is there was a decision then that was made by the league about whether or not, because the Coliseum just really wasn't up to standards for a modern NHL arena. So long story short, a compromise was made where instead of playing all of their games, basically outside of Manhattan, they would build a new arena closer to the sort of the heart of the fans on Long Island. And it was a great behavioral economic story. It's a great psychology story. It's a great sort of a connection with emotions and business and bottom line. And it's just a remarkable tale in professional sports where you can actually measure the performance of your team by wins. And they were performing noticeably better when they were in front of their just passionate diehard fans in the center of Long Island, as opposed to closer to Manhattan, where those folks couldn't necessarily make the journey.
Right. Yeah. And can we talk about the rigidity of the ownership? Like how initially, obviously, the thinking was, who cares? We'll find new fans elsewhere. Like, what's the big deal? It's Brooklyn, right? We're not going to find fans in Brooklyn. Like, get out of here. So, right. Can you tell us about that and how essentially he went from like this pretty much this rigid position where the idea was, we can have both, right? We could have rabid fans, and we can essentially make a ton of money doing so, right? But then, obviously as things kind of went on and he started thinking about it, and you see, sort of, you tell me the story, right? I don't want to get into it too much. So, so can you tell us about how the Think, Talk, Create process applied here?
Yeah, it was great because it was the lived experience of Think, Talk, Create. I mean, they had to come up with this. They had to innovate a solution to the problem that they were facing, and that's what Think, Talk, Create is great for. Is it really is a problem solving methodology, and they use active inquiry and you ask open ended questions where you don't come at it with a preconceived notion. So you stop, you pause, you think, you reflect. That's the think step. Talk, you engage in dialogue through active inquiry, asking open-ended questions and saying, well, what are the things we can do differently here? Open-ended questions are questions that start with what or how, as opposed to closed-ended questions, which are just that elicit a yes or no response. So you want to try to ask open-ended questions because it encourages your conversation partner to expand upon what they're saying. And then so you ask some good open-ended questions, and then you sort of innovate the solution. You create something new, and you build a new model that you probably didn't even have in the back of your mind before. And this process allows you to come to these sort of these innovative steps. So the owner and it was more than the owner, but the ownership team, leadership, government officials as well were involved in this. They really practiced active inquiry with fans to say, like, okay, so what are the things that we can be doing differently? How can we change our model here? And the thinking was that we'll just move to Brooklyn and we'll magically develop fans, but that's of course not how emotions and behavior work. You can't just show up somewhere and all of a sudden you're going to have this rabid fan base that's been devoted to you for the last 30-40 years. They started to engage in active inquiry with fans. There's a story of leadership riding the subway and talking with fans and asking them questions while they're on the subway, like, so what did you think of this, or what do you think we might do here, or how can this be better here? Good active inquiry questions. So it was a good application of Think Talk Create, where they use the model to come up with a solution that was a win-win for both the organization financially and for the fans who were so just passionately devoted to them.
Yeah, that's interesting too, because by asking these open-ended questions, essentially you're getting the person that you're discussing with to engage more with you in conversation, right? So it becomes sort of like a rapport building exercise too. Do you feel like these open-ended questions essentially help you to feel like, I don't know, like you're contributing in a sense to the ideas that you're discussing? Maybe that's too general, but in the sense that let's say I'm at a workplace meeting, right? And all of a sudden I start engaging in the process of active inquiry, right? And I bring up an idea at work. Let's say, I think maybe at work we should allow for more let's say workplace flexibility. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, it's been a tough year. A lot of our employees have gotten used to working at home. Do you think that maybe it would be a good idea if, even though tensions with the pandemic are decreasing, that maybe we should still allow for more workplace flexibility and allow employees to still work from home if that's what they're most comfortable doing? And then it's not like a yes or no sort of question. So then it starts a conversation, right? Do you feel like engaging in that kind of conversation allows for more of rapport building, essentially?
Yeah, absolutely. So the benefit of Think Talk Create is that it really builds, as you said, rapport. It builds trust amongst the dialogue participants. So we're striving to build psychologically safe workplace environments. That's the goal here, because that's the key indicator of performance. Real quick, psychological safety is verified by Project Aristotle and Google, a number of behavioral psychologists. But the core idea of psychological safety is that it's an environment where you feel free to share ideas without judgment or reprisal. So if I'm in a meeting and I have an idea, I can raise my hand and I will not be made fun of. And I'm confident that I will not be mocked or made fun of, ridiculed, or punished, or reprimanded, any of the above, any negative action. There will be no negative consequence to my sharing an idea. And as you can imagine, psychological safety is the indicator of performance, because teams that have that sort of that space where employees can share ideas and team members can engage with one another are most likely to create new solutions in an innovative way, because it's like 8 heads are better than one. I mean, you're all working together at all times. And Google found this to be the only indicator of high performing teams. So it was the only thing that high performing teams had consistently was psychological safety. So that's the backstory there. But Think Talk Create builds psychological safety because by asking open-ended questions, you're building trust and rapport with your colleagues. So it's a respectful way of saying, yeah, that's an interesting idea. let's talk about it a little bit more, is more or less what you're sort of saying under the surface here. It's like you're acknowledging that the idea that they have, and then you're expanding upon that idea. And then also, if you're the one posing the question, if you're coming up with the idea and you want to pose the question yourself, it's a great way of inviting others to join in on your idea with you. So instead of saying, I have an idea, I think we should wear Tampa Bay Buccaneers shirts when we do our podcast. I know that was probably a discussion that you guys had. And so you can say, well, I'm not sure, that might be, that's a statement. Whereas if you say, what if we were to wear Tampa Bay Buccaneers shirts? It's just phrasing it as a question. It invites the person you're sitting across from to say, no, that's a terrible idea. We should wear, but so it's a space where you can share ideas freely, and Think Talk Create allows you to build that rapport and trust, because you're inviting others to conversation with you. And that right there is it cultivates really great results.
Yeah. What would you say is like a good way to give feedback when you're listening to ideas from someone?
So there are a number of models for feedback. Like there's a sort of recipes or formulas that you can think in your head, but they're all basically getting to the same thing. I think one of the first and foremost, one of the most important things is that you acknowledge what they're saying as sort of, and not immediately criticize or jump to a conclusion about it. So you could add a phrase like, that's interesting. Wow, I never really thought of it that way. There's all these different little catchphrases that you can use to just acknowledge the person and what they brought to the table. And then just as soon as you acknowledge them, then you can jump right into another open-ended question. So that's really interesting. I had never really thought of it that way. I wonder, what about trying it X, or what about what if we did this, or how would it look like if we blank? And right there, you're just keeping that conversation going. Now, you inevitably are going to reach a point where there's probably, you've maxed out on your active inquiry, and you've done enough open-ended questions, because you could do this. It would be a tautology. You'd just be doing this in circles.
Mm-hmm.
But and you'll know when that is, though, when you reach a conclusion and you sort of come to it organically, and you say, geez, I wonder, have we come up with a solution here? That could be a final question there. And then you agree. And it's when the create step happens, and you build the new solution, new product, whatever it might be. But it's a process that continually repeats itself as well, which is great. It's not like you do Think Talk Create once and you're done doing it. It's okay, let's do Think Talk Create in this meeting, and then we're going to keep it going next meeting, and then it's a process that continually builds on itself.
Yeah. And then, so from your workshops, obviously the ones that you and David do together, what have you guys learned about some of the barriers, right? Why is it that, so what you're saying seems natural. It seems like that's kind of just the way humans are supposed to behave, right? But obviously, when we're thinking about corporations, you don't see that much, and you don't see that too often. So what are some of the barriers, and why did they occur?
There's a number of barriers. Well, the funny thing is, I got a comment, one of the best comments that I got from a friend of mine who read the book. She messaged me and she said, I love your book because it's so obvious. And she said, I thought that was a really great piece of feedback. She said, because it's counterintuitive, but it's obvious. And we know we've all been in work environments before. We can probably think of some that are not as positive as we'd like them to be. And chances are they did not lead a Think Talk Create culture. They did not have that sort of environment when you were working there. And the barriers it's a combination of factors, but one of them can often just be ego, where you have employees who are looking to better themselves and not necessarily their teammates or the organization. So I want to look good here, so I'm going to offer my idea and put other ideas down. Another barrier is what we talk about extensively in the book, is a rigidity and focus on numbers. So that's a combination of numbers only and short-termism. So I need to have immediate results now. I need to have, what are the quarterly numbers? What are the weekly metrics? What are, whatever the bottom line, what are the numbers that we need to focus on? And so that rigidity and focus on numbers only can be a detriment to an active inquiry experience or Think Talk Create culture. So you are so focused on the result that you forget about what's the best way to get to that result. Get it done is not a management style. So when you have a manager in there who's just sort of barking orders and wants this and that, and we need to have the solution immediately, you might forget about the best way to get to that solution. And so some of the barriers are, this rigidity on focus on quantitative only thinking, and also just a desire to maybe make yourself look as though you're the smartest person in the room, or we forget the humanity and the skills that we have and that are innate within us, because we're just so focused on getting results, and we forget that, maybe there's this other process out there that would be better.
Yeah. And how do they think about it? Because, I mean, look, I get it. Maybe this is just, our way of thinking, because of it. I think the three of us are kind of philosophically minded. So, but just, I mean, can you just guide me through this, right? Why would somebody, and again, maybe this is a stupid question. So why would somebody sacrifice not just long-term benefits, right, but create these significant long-term risks for the sake of short-term profits?
Oh, that's a very long answer to that question, but I can tell you, let me answer that question with an example.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll use the role of a CEO. So about 50, 60 years ago, the role of a CEO was salaried. So an employee who was the leader of the organization was salaried and had earned money just as every other employee did in the organization, a bit more money than every other employee, but they earned a stable salary. So in the 70s, 80s, there's a change in thought that says, well, that can lead to rogue CEOs. That can lead to CEOs who are not aligned with the ownership of the company. So if I'm an owner and I have a CEO who's salaried, they might not agree with me on decisions that are best for the company. So how can I incentivize that CEO to make decisions that are in my best interest as the owner? And what changed is the way in which CEOs were paid. And what happened was, instead of being salaried, they were connected they were aligned with the interest of ownership. So they were paid through stock, or they were paid through equity in the company. They were paid by how well the company performed. And now also remember, CEOs generally, by and large, do not last very long in their position. Typically, like 5 years is the CEO tenure. Now there are outliers, there are no question, but by and large, CEOs are not in their roles very long. So you have CEOs who are aligned with ownership and need to maximize, who want to make as much money as they can when they're working. And so they are incentivized to focus on short-term results as opposed to long-term health and sustainability and growth of the company. So their motivation is to squeeze out every dime that they can in the time that they're working there. And my sense is that does actually trickle down a little bit, and that you see this mindset in the CEO, and then, then the senior management team is probably going to have that mindset, and the middle management team is going to have that mindset, and it just sort of, affects the organization that way. But that's just one example, is that you had a change in how CEOs were paid, and that change in CEO pay structure was basically necessitated short-term thinking, because all they cared about was making as much money as they could while they were employed, and that meant I'm gonna maximize as much as I can this quarter, because I might not be here next year.
Oh, okay. So it's not so much of a compartmentalization. The idea essentially is, well, if I'm not here, obviously in the future, who cares, right? It's not, it's not like, there's no, I guess, like unconscious psychological process where the person is in some sort of denial. It's like, no, I know that this is going to end up badly and I'm out of here. So let's try to get as much as I possibly can.
I'll give an example of a situation I was in. So I used to work in a call center, and essentially, based on the demand or how many people were calling in that day. So let's say I had an hour lunch usually on any given day. But if it was, let's say, a Monday and it's a particular busy day, they would cut that to maybe 30 minutes, right? Which sounds reasonable, right? You want to be available for the clients that are calling in. But eventually, as I continued to work there, for some reason, they started cutting, not for some reason, sorry, in order to meet the demands of these clients who are calling in, they would cut the lunches on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays. It ended up being the whole week. Wow. And when, for example, I was accustomed to that 1 hour lunch before and then had that sort of switch, it affected how I felt working there, in terms of just feeling like I had enough of a break to sort of cool down in between working. So eventually, they maintained that procedure for like several months, and then it just kind of weighed on me, and I was hoping they would, prioritize the mental health, let's say, of the employees over the productivity, because then maybe that would, yeah, there's that short-term gain of you're able to accommodate all these clients, but long term the employee is not satisfied, and then maybe what's the long game there? Maybe I'm not as productive. Maybe I care less about the company because I feel they care less about me. Now, they probably, I always assume, though, I try to give the benefit of the doubt, right? There's reasons why certain things are done at companies. Not everyone is cold in their thinking, but it is important to take into account how employees feel. So the number, being metrics based isn't always the best way to go about things.
Right. And then, so Ryan, what would you say then if somebody were to say, well, this is why capitalism sucks, right? This is why it doesn't work and why we should do away with it altogether.
So this was a point that David and I discussed at length, and it was that we are capitalists. We believe in the capitalist system and we're in the capitalist model. So we are not in any way advocating for any line of socialist thinking in this book. We are trying to help companies grow and perform better. We just want employees and customers to stay alive as well as a result of company growth. It's not an unreasonable request, we don't think. But yeah, this is not an anti-capitalist book in any way, shape, or form. In fact, it's quite the opposite. We're saying, here's how capitalism can perform even better. We want the companies that we're talking about in this book to be more successful. One of the most heartbreaking, not to bring on a downer note, but one of the more heartbreaking experiences I had when working on the book was I was talking to Samia Stumo's mother, and we were talking. She was a victim of the Boeing of the Ethiopian Airlines crash, and when the Boeing plane went down in the MAX 8, and just brilliant young woman who was traveling to work overseas, and she was doing healthcare work in underserved communities in Africa, and she was on the plane, went down, of course, and when tragic loss of life. And the bizarre story with Samia is that, not to give any secrets away from the book, but she is the niece of Ralph Nader, who crusaded for safer automobiles, and sort of, and his claim to fame was that he took on the automotive industry, which was chasing profits at the expense of passenger safety. So here, his niece dies in a plane crash, Boeing, which was the fault of the airline, of the airline manufacturer of Boeing, for chasing profits at the expense of safety. And I'm on the phone with her mother, and she said, I want Boeing to be successful, which I did not expect her to say during the call. And that was a sort of a shocking moment, because here's this woman who lost her daughter in the hands of this company who was contracted to keep her safe, and they failed in that contract. And she's saying, look, ultimately I still want them to be a successful business. She just doesn't want other people to go through what she went through. And so I think I cannot even begin to fathom and imagine what she had to endure and what she experienced. And I hope no one has to endure what she had to endure. But we want companies to be successful, and then we're trying to provide a solution for businesses to grow and be profitable. You mentioned working in a call center. Well, there's a story we didn't include in the book. Actually, one of the challenges with this book was that we had so many stories and that we couldn't include them all. But there's a story from a colleague of ours when he was working in a consulting capacity with one of the large financial service companies, and they had a call center that had 100% turnover annually. So 100% of the employees in the call center turned over every year. So you can imagine how expensive that was for recruitment, for training, it was not a good, forget it, talk about bottom line. It was not good for the bottom line of the company to have 100% turnover in the call center. So management realized that they had a problem, and they went to the employees and they asked an open-ended question. So what are some things that we might be able to do differently? How can we make this experience better for you? they had a conversation, and then they said we'll bring on a team of consultants to help sort of improve the process by which you work, through which you work. And in the year that they asked the question, just what can we do differently, or how can we make your life better, they had a 25% improvement in retention just by asking the question, not by doing anything yet. Just from asking the question and saying, we hear you, we see that something's wrong, we acknowledge that there's a pain point here, we're going to try to solve it. 25% improvement in retention just from asking that question. And then when they went in and brought the consultants in, that they had a turnaround as far as turnover. But it was just acknowledging the employee's pain point was enough to make the company more profitable. So we can, throughout the book, and we advocate for this, is that we are trying to help companies be more successful. And that's the sort of the perverse incentive with CEO pay, just going back to that example, is you brought up a great point. So they leave after 5 years, then what? Well, they don't care because they're not an employee of the company anymore. But if you're the owner, you still care. And so the idea here is that, well, I'm just going to hire another CEO who cares as much as I do. I'm going to align the incentives, and they're going to earn as much money as they can by maximizing profit in the short term. And we're going to go through this short cycle after short cycle, but you're burning the candle at both ends. Eventually the company is going to crumble because it's not a sustainable model. But and this really impacts. So if you're the single owner of a company, and or maybe a family ownership, and you hire a CEO, okay, you might be concerned about that. But chances are, I mean, you guys own stock in companies. Do you know when they go under? If one stock tanks, then okay, you go buy another. So when it's stock ownership and you have these massive corporations that are owned by lots and lots of people, not just one person, it's who are they answering to? Yeah, ownership is the stockholders, but it's these, okay, you go to a shareholder meeting, but thousands of people are in the room. Right, and so it's a sneaky system, because the CEOs can sort of escape without any repercussions, and they certainly get the golden parachutes if they behave badly. So it's a foolish model, because the companies are not set up to be successful in the long term. They're set up to be successful in the short term, and then eventually you're going to run out of runway.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So, okay. So if we're going to apply this model, right, and we're going to say, okay, we want to get out of the quantitative mindset solely, right? I guess, what will we do? What are some of the steps to kind of make that happen, and how do we make it actionable?
So it's important to probably mention here that we're not advocating for the abdication of quantitative thinking entirely. Numbers matter, and they make a difference, and we want data, and we want good science, and we want good numbers and math, and to support our decisions. We're just saying that the numbers the pendulum has gone askew as of late, and it's kind of swung in the quantitative direction a little too hard, and now we want to sort of bring it back to the center and get the balance between the quantitative and the qualitative realms. And so if you're in an organization that's so focused on the numbers, chances are it's because it's of some sort of short-term mindset. So a good place to start might be thinking longer term and saying, instead of, well, how can we be successful this week? Let's think about, how can we be successful this week next year? Or how can we be successful this week in a few? And so you can start framing your questions with a longer time frame around those questions. So instead of saying, well, what can we do to have a good launch this summer? Well, what can we do to have a good product launch that leads to better results next quarter? Or what can we do? So you start framing your questions in a wider scope, and then all of a sudden your thinking might stretch a little bit from short, really, really narrow and really, really tight and short term, to a bit longer and broader scope of time.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to consider the possibilities of what's possible as far as ripple effects, in terms of, all right, if we do prioritize how our employees feel at work, or we do encourage them to collaborate and have these open-ended conversation, or ask open-ended questions and think, talk, and create, essentially. I wonder, what kind of ideas would come from those kinds of employees, instead of somebody who feels rigid, stuck, it feels like they're just doing what they're supposed to be doing, every single day, stuck in the automaticity of things.
Right.
Imagine what could happen, yeah, after a year,
And
5 years, 10 years at a company. And yeah,
you know what that even made me think of? And I mean, obviously, I know we're not socialists, but I mean, Marx's alienation. I mean, that's what we're talking about. People feel alienated from themselves. They feel alienated. Well, from themselves, I mean, their kind of motives and goals, because it feels like the company's kind of bestowing the goals on them. So they're alienated from themselves. They're alienated from their coworkers because they pretty much feel like there's no actual collaboration. You're just pretty much told from the top down what to do. And there's even an alienation from the product or from the service, because you're essentially given either some script that you work off of. And I have clients, by the way, who do that and who struggle with that. I have a client who's he's a recruiter, and literally he's like, all I do is I read a script all day, and he's like, it really fucking sucks and it's hard to do because it's the same thing, and I have like particular answers that I'm supposed to give, and then particular questions that I'm supposed to ask. So if somebody says this is my response. If somebody says that, this is the question that I would ask them. So again, you have like this threefold form of alienation where people come to work, and essentially it's like Office Space, where you come in and you're like, it's 9 o'clock, and you're like, yeah, I got to go have coffee for like the next 2 hours because I can't be here anymore.
Absolutely. No, it's we had Office Space in the back of our minds a lot when we were writing the book, because there's and also The Office as well, for the British and the American. I mean, there's workplace comedies are funny because they point out the reality of our professional existence at times, and so the I suppose that's like the Camus quote: "Life is absurd, but it only becomes tragic when it becomes when we're aware of it, when it becomes conscious to us." And so yeah, maybe it's a bit cathartic to watch these sort of workplace comedies, because like you just poke fun at the absurdity of what you do every day. But yeah, when we were working in a property management company and doing a workshop for them, and we were doing active inquiry and practicing Think Talk Create with them, and we posed a question to the room, and what happened was it was their sort of their annual retreat, if you will, and they had all of their employees sectioned off in different tables. So the lawyers were at a table, accountants were at a table, management team was at one table, and because they were a property management company, they had maintenance technicians, so their custodial staff was there as well, and they were seated at another table. And we were talking about ways in which the company can be more successful and how they can grow. And we asked the question, what are some of your pain points? And a custodian raised his hand and said loss. And so we got to talking with him and practice active inquiry in front of the crowd. And come to find out, these custodians who were working in these buildings every day with a lot of elderly residents developed these close emotional connections with the residents, because the residents who were living alone would ask them to come in and do odd jobs, like, hey, can you open the pickle jar for me? Can you come in and change the light bulb? Can you fix the batteries in my remote? That kind of thing. So they developed this friendship with these folks, and then inevitably the elderly residents would pass away, and these custodians would be experiencing grief, and so they talked about the loss they felt, and it really opened up the discussion, the floodgates in the room, because people started talking about other sort of emotional elements of their work. And it helped the company realize that in their customer service, this is what made them so unique and so special, is that their custodians were willing to go into, residents' apartments and open a pickle jar. That really was meaningful for them as an organization. It was a great marketing tool for them as an organization as well. So it was a win-win for the company, because they hired grief counselors for the custodians, and they also sort of reframed how they sold themselves to potential customers and folks who were looking to move into their buildings. Like, we provide this comprehensive experience for you. We're not this sort of management company that just throws you the keys and turns off your hot water. This is the kind of experience you're going to have here. So that was all the result of Think Talk Create, and that process was helping them uncover that. And that's one of the important things here, is that that was from a custodian who brought that to in front of the CEO. I mean, that was a custodian came up with that idea. And you'd be amazed at the talent and the ideas that are within your office and within your colleagues. And so how can we put again, 8 heads are better than one. So how can we get all of these minds together thinking and coming up with ideas? And yeah, a lot of them are not going to be good ideas. That's okay. I mean, that's the whole part of the creative process, is that not everything is a home run. You might get one a year. That's an amazing idea, but it's still you have to go through the process to get there. And so, if you have a team, then you'll be surprised at some of the things that they can come up with.
Right. And so monetarily, if we accept the fact that CEOs are pretty much there for the short term, how do we then incentivize them? So pretty much how do we incentivize them how to think long term and how to obviously think, talk, create?
Well, you could look. I'm not an expert on CEO pay, and I'm not an expert on how they should be restructured. But
I hear you.
For example, you might align their pay longer term. So instead of just extracting short-term value, you could say, well, you're going to be paid over X period of time. Mm-hmm. So if the company does well over 20 years, you might get that money, not over 2 years. But so there are a number of ways in which you might do that. You could, of course, restructure the way CEOs are compensated entirely as it was restructured 30, 40 years ago, 50 years ago. Right. But, that's leave that to the MBA professors to set up a new CEO compensation structure. But it clearly is out of whack a bit right now. There was a section in the book when I was making the fourth round of edits or fifth round of edits, and the percentage increase in CEO pay I thought was a typo. And I said, oh, no, it can't be that high. I must have added a 0 there by accident. Mm-hmm. And I circled it for the editor. And then I went back and said, I need to double check this because I'm probably typing it late. And I missed added a couple zeros and it was wrong. Right. And no, it was right. And it was just this astonishing moment where I thought CEO pay went up nearly 1,000% compared to the average worker pay that went up like 12%. I mean, it's just like, wait, what? Mm-hmm. So anyways, it was just things are out of whack, and it would be great to reorient the ship a little bit.
Yeah. Right. And anyway, your clients and the companies they work for, by applying this methodology, they are seeing returns from applying this methodology, obviously. Right. So, I mean, even if the CEO incentive structure remains the same, if they're getting some kind of benefit from it, then it's still a win-win situation, right?
Could be. Because I think the structure is important. So, but I mean, Ryan, go ahead. What do you think?
Sorry.
Yeah, no, we were working with a company this summer, and it was after the book was published, and they were a financial services firm, and they grew at a astonishing rate during the pandemic, which was not a typical story you heard in financial services. So they grew. They doubled their team or something and over the course of the year, which is just in financial services during the pandemic. That was not, and they were a small company too. So it was just not typically what the story that we heard. And we got together with them and we led a seminar for them with sort of their first back to the office event. And the team members were there for the first time. Many of them who were hired over the pandemic, they were meeting their colleagues for the first time because they'd all been on Zoom or emails in the previous 12 months. And so we sat around the tables, we got there, and the CEO, the managing director for this particular office got up and with all of the new employees there said, okay, so what are some of the things that we can be doing to be successful this year? What are some of the, he just dove into Think, Talk, Create, and Active Inquiry. And he was posing questions. He was asking brand new employees, what are your ideas about how we can be more successful this year? So whether you work there for 4 years, whether you work there for 4 minutes, your opinion was valued and respected. So I don't know how the CEOs paid at that company. I'm not sure how the managing directors paid at that company. I have no idea. I have no insight into that. I'm sure very well. But the approach that they took was, okay, you're a new employee. I don't care. What are your ideas? How can we be better this year? What are some things that we can do to deepen our relationship with our customers? What are some products that we might come up with? What are some new financial service tools that we could build? Or it was all active inquiry. That's all it was. And they practiced this during the pandemic and then after the pandemic, and it showed. I was sitting there thinking, well, this is why you grew, because this was your approach to everything. It's like, I'm going to get everyone together, ask them what can we do to be better, and we're going to grow as a result of that, no question. And they did.
What I love so much about your kind of thinking, and just obviously in terms of just the process itself and the way you think about people's You know what?
experience.
Actually, you know what? Hold on. I actually want to read a quote. I actually want to read a quote. So just give me one sec because I want to actually get into this. And I think it's really important, obviously, to the conversation about just workers and the power they have. Okay. So this is going into William James. And I'm going to just read a little bit of a passage from this. So Ryan and David wrote, this was an idea presented. Okay. So let me actually go back. So it is our underlying cognitions about who we are that largely determine how we act in that world. This was an idea presented in large part by William James, who wrote in an 1870 diary entry, my first act of free will shall be to believe in free will. Urban legend tells of a story in which James was asked to deliver a lengthy speech in front of a crowd of academics and researchers eager to hear his thoughts on the history of psychology. Settled in for an extensive report, the crowd was shocked by James's choice to speak for just a few seconds. Quote unquote, they asked me to talk about the last 100 years of psychological research, he said to have told them, quote unquote, it can be summed up in the statement, people by and large become what they think of themselves. Thank you and good night. Love that story, right? And it talks about, and when we kind of think about, right, the power that people have, that's what it talks about. So the ideas that James has when we're talking about and thinking about cognitive behavioral therapy, just psychotherapy in general, think, talk, create, right? When we're thinking about just the power of kind of collective bargaining, but also just collective work together. I love that you focus so much on the power of the individual employee. So to me, that's astonishing because oftentimes, and I know I felt this in multiple companies, the thought is like, who am I? Who am I to say anything? Who am I to speak out? Who's going to listen to me, right? I'm just this person who's, let's say, from my perspective, it would have been like, I'm just like a clinician, right? I have like a psychiatrist working above me. Let's say I may even have nurse practitioners, a director, an assistant director. I have, managers, owners, whatever. And so from that perspective, it's really hard, or it's really easy actually to see yourself as like the little guy. And you're like, who, I'm just, what do I have to really contribute here? So what I love, and I really want to focus on this, is the fact that you're taking William James and you're saying to yourself, well, and to the readers, obviously, we're saying to the readers that no, you're actually way more powerful than you think you are. And if you continue to think of yourself as this little person on like the bottom of the totem pole, then yeah, no change is ever going to happen. But it's so much bigger than that. And you have so much more potential than you think.
Yeah, so I love that section of the book, and that's one of my favorite sections of the book. And I want to give credit to that story about William James came from Dr. Bob Rotella, who's a sports psychologist, and so I want to give him credit for that story. But so we often have this mindset when we're working in companies, particularly large organizations, that we are this tiny little canoe in front of the Titanic coming at us, and that really there's nothing we can do in our canoe to redirect that ship. I mean, we're going to get it's way beyond our control and outside of our control. We were talking to a colleague of ours and a friend of ours, and when she was working for a different organization, and she was saying, the company's this, the company's that, the company's this, the company's that, and they're so toxic, and the company's this. And she was a senior executive at this company, and she was saying, the company was this, company's that. And at one point we stopped her and we said, you are the company. Like, she was a senior executive at the company. She was talking about how toxic the culture was and how leadership was terrible, and and so she's going on and on about the shortcomings of the company. And she had she was in the C-suite. And at one point we just stopped her and we said, you are the company though. Like you said, you're one of the key features of the figures of this company. So we often forget the role that we can play. And look, we acknowledge in this in the book, we understand that the assembly line employee working at a processing center for Amazon might not have as much influence on Jeff Bezos as somebody in the C-suite does, and we absolutely acknowledge that. There's a scale here for our ability to influence the company, but everyone has agency, and that was a key factor of our book. Is we wanted to make sure that this wasn't viewed as okay, well, the CEO has to change and our company will change, because we get that a lot. It's like, oh, the company is this, the company is that, our leadership is bad. And we try to reframe that as, okay, we hear you. What are some things that you're doing though that we can to better this environment? What are some things that you can do to create a more positive experience for your colleagues? And so everyone has agency, and yes, it comes in varying degrees depending upon your role. But it was really important to us when we wrote this book that it's not a CEO only book. A lot of business books and leadership books are designed to be read by people who sit in the corner office. And we wanted to write a book that should be read by people sitting in cubicles. That was the idea of the book. The motivation was to write it and to sort of flip who it's written for. And so this book is to show that you actually can enact positive change. With the story of the custodian, I mean, just having the ability to say that they experienced loss, that completely reshaped the way that company retreat went. And that was from somebody who was on the bottom of the pay scale. And so it's really important that we conveyed to the reader that you have agency in creating positive change. But that agency comes when you believe in the fact that you can create positive change. And that's why we mentioned William James, because he says that, yeah, my first act in having free will is believing that I have free will. It's like I gotta believe myself capable of creating positive change in order to create positive change. So that we often think of our workplace as this giant ship coming at us and we're sitting in the canoe, but you've got to believe that you can change the course of that ship. You've got somewhere deep down within you, you've got to believe that. And if you don't believe that you can create change, you won't.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, it becomes a snowball effect where, let's say, if you have a person who's thinking about unionizing, and let's say, they believe that it can happen, they're not really that sure, but they say to themselves, okay, it's worth the risk, right? There's some, let's say, moderate level of probability or possibility that this can work out. And then that person might talk to another person, and then that person thinks, yeah, you know what, maybe we can make this happen. Maybe we can have a union here. And then that person talks to another person. And then, you kind of have like this sort of snowball effect where you had just one person initially believing that maybe it could possibly happen and saying it was worth the risk, even if it doesn't, obviously. But then you had another person saying, well, I actually believe in this because you believe in this. And then come to think of it, you know what? Yeah, this does sound like a possibility. And then the third person believes in it, and then fourth and fifth. And hopefully, I mean, obviously, if there's no union busting and shenanigans going on behind the scenes, the idea is that you can actually form a union, and now you don't really necessarily have to worry about whether or not like, let's say, psychological safety is going to be a component or a staple of the company, because it is, right? It's a part of being in a union, where you not only have representation, but you pretty much have an equal voice in the representation too. So it's not just some person kind of like high up or whatever, sitting on some throne and kind of dictating what the negotiations of the union and obviously the company would be. It's more so like, no, you guys have meetings and everybody's heard equally and everybody has a vote.
Right. And just to add to that, so and unions are amazing, but even just the kind of team that you can create from having a group of empowered individuals, right, the emergent property that can arise from that, yep, it's incredibly powerful. And going back actually to that executive that you were mentioning earlier as an example, which said, oh, my company is this, my company is that. That reminds me of this book. I forget who it's by. I believe it's called Tribal Leadership. And they were talking about the different types of tribes. Like one is, for example, I'm the only one contributing in my group. Everyone else in my group sucks. And there's another level where my group is amazing. Every other group sucks. Then there's another level where my group is amazing, and then every other group is amazing too. But we're concentrating on what we're doing and something like that. And then these mindsets are incredibly important because, like you said, Ryan, it could be very disempowering to not believe that you have agency and you have an ability to sort of impact the goings on of your workplace and what's possible.
Yep. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the not the conflicting, but one of the most meaningful messages that we can say with the book is that, for example, we talk about workplace issues and employer. I mean, we believe that Amazon can be bigger, for example. We believe that Amazon can be even more successful than it already is. Mm-hmm. And so if they maybe shifted their mindset with some of the employee issues that they're having, it might actually lead to even bigger growth and better growth for them as opposed to less growth. And so these companies who are often on the front page and who find themselves, with negative headlines written about them, can actually maybe even be better and bigger than they already are by adopting this mindset and treating workers a bit differently. One of the funny things, though, that you notice if, for example, watching TV and you see commercials, human sells, being human sells. So as a company, if I market myself as a human-friendly company or an environmental company, or what call it the greenwashing with environmentalism, but if I market myself as a people-first business, that's an attractive marketing tool. That's people buy into that, and so you'll be watching. There was actually there's a company that we wrote about in the book. It's a big company that we did not disclose their name for confidentiality purposes because of their employee who told us the story that didn't want to be identified. So we changed the name of the company in the book, and they were profoundly dehumanizing. I mean, the company was just, I could tell you, we told you stories in the book on some of the things they did to employees, like firing somebody on their 24th year, 364th day so that they couldn't receive the full retirement benefits that they were entitled to at 25 years, like things like that. And I was watching TV recently, and there was a commercial for this company talking about how they were people-oriented and people-centric and humans come first and yada, yada, yada. And I'm sitting there knowing sort of the backstory thinking this is ridiculous. And it's so if humanity sells in your marketing ads, why not practice what you preach? Like if humanity sells and people want that, then why aren't you living that? And one of the interesting data points that we came across when we were doing this was something like 70 or 80% of employees want to work for a company that creates positive value in the world and makes an impact and makes a difference. And of those employees that want to work for companies that make a difference, only 20% or 30% believe that their company is telling the truth in how it positions itself as far as making that difference. So in other words, roughly only one of every five employees actually believes what the company's saying as far as its humanistic efforts. And 80% of your team members are rolling their eyes saying, you're not actually human. You're not actually, you're poisoning the well here. And I know you are. So what can, there's a disconnect between employees who want to create a difference and then working for an organization that they actually don't believe does make a difference. So if humanity sells, why not just be humane? Why, if you're marketing yourself as being a humanistic organization, then be that humanistic organization.
Yeah. And I mean, look, I'm going to ask you something that's a bit more kind of anecdotal because I'm just curious about your experience. I mean, obviously, I'm sure it's really hard to even get stats on this, but I am really curious about it. So look, from my perspective, I'm pretty cynical about just major corporations in general. And I think for the most part, they're probably mostly shit, right? That's kind of what I've seen, right? That's the anecdotal evidence that I have, right? So from your perspective, do you find that for the most part, corporations, kind of are full of shit? Or do you find that it's actually kind of mostly a misperception, right? That let's say popularized by the news, maybe even sensationalized, where it's more about like the recency bias, right? It's, the stuff that we see on the news and then we kind of generalize and we think, oh, okay, Amazon did this one terrible thing, therefore they must globally be terrible, right? So what's your experience been on just major corporations?
The way I'll answer that is by saying, I think we need to do a better job of managing our expectations. So take, for example, the recent headlines around Facebook. And you have an employee who says Facebook is motivated by profit and they made decisions that were in their own financial best interest and not in the interest of necessarily all individuals who use their platform. No kidding. Like that was my response to that was, yes, thank you. We know that. That's a corporation. Almost by definition, like we understand that they're motivated by profit, and it's a horrible reality. And I understand that we want to create change and we want companies to be more responsible to their customers and to their employees. Absolutely, but the revelation that companies are motivated by profit and motivated by their own best interest doesn't come as a surprise to me when I see it in the news. And so that's just one example. And while I do genuinely believe that it's difficult to say companies because ultimately companies are made up of people. And so corporations don't exist without the people that work for them. So if when the people left AIG, when they carried their briefcases and their boxes from their desks out of the office, and the company no longer existed because there was no one working there. So if we all magically got up and went to Mars, the companies that are here on Earth would no longer exist because they're made up of people. So to say that companies are motivated by profit or it's really, we're talking about the individuals that work for these organizations. So it's one thing to say, oh, the company made a decision. The company did this. Facebook made, no, they didn't. A person made that decision. Facebook didn't make any decisions. Facebook is a name. It's the logo. It's a brand. It's a brand. So you had the leadership team members who made decisions. So what we're talking about here is individuals and not corporations. So my answer, it's a big question, but my answer would be, one, we need to manage our expectations, and two, stop referring to them as these entities unto themselves, because they are not. They are individuals who are making decisions on behalf of a picture that you see, which is their logo. So it's the people that we can try to encourage to change, but companies by and large are not entities unto themselves. They're collectives of individuals.
Right. And so if we're kind of expanding that and saying, well, as a person who's taking on your service or who's buying your product, I have power too, right? Like Alan has power, right? We buy things. I bought something from Dunkin' Donuts this morning. So, okay, does that mean that ethically speaking, and I mean, I have an answer to this. I'm obviously just curious about yours. What is it okay for a person to, let's say, boycott a company, right? Is it okay for a group of people to boycott a company because of unethical practices? So I know plenty of people who don't even use Facebook anymore, even before the whistleblower, like for years, they're like, oh my God. I actually know somebody who was, and this is, I guess, sort of funny because this person, I don't want to reveal too much about them because maybe this could hurt their career, but this person was actually offered a job at Facebook and they said, I'm not taking it. Like, I do not care. And it was actually a pretty lucrative offer too. And they said, I'm not doing it. This is just like, it's super unethical, right? So from your perspective, do you feel like we first of all, I mean, we do have the ability, but I guess, do you feel as though it's ethical for a group and a community to band together and say, yeah, we're just not going to participate in this if this isn't like up to our standard?
Yeah, we're free to make our own decisions. I mean, ultimately, just like a company's free to make their, we're talking about mask mandates and saying how, a company's mandating vaccination or mandating mask mandates. Well, it's a private organization. If they want to mandate, yeah, sure. I mean, they're free to make their own decisions. And just like as a consumer too, you have the freedom to make your own decisions. I want to shop here. I don't want to shop here. Do what you will. It's different when you talk about employees though. So I get this question occasionally from philosophical circles in particular, is they basically say, well, isn't it unethical to use philosophy to help businesses be more successful? And it's a bit of a gotcha question, but the way in which I respond to that is by saying, I would rather be able to apply my ideas and create a positive impact within the organization than sitting outside the organization with little ability to enforce change or create change. So if I'm an employee, if I have the ability to be an employee at an organization, well, I will probably have a greater likelihood of success in positively affecting that organization than if I stay outside and sort of write blog posts about it. So if I want, we'll move away from Facebook. If I want Amazon to change and I get offered an executive position at Amazon, I might be more inclined to take that position because I can create change from within. I become the company, just like that. We're talking about, I started the executive, like, oh, the company's this, company's that. Well, now I'm the company. Right. And so I would rather be able to enact positive change as an employee than not, or in my role as a consultant. So I could be in academia. I could be writing papers that are read by two people. Yes, absolutely true. But I'd rather have my ideas read more widely. And I would like to create a positive impact in the world, in the real world, not necessarily the ivory tower. And so the way in which I go about doing that is doing podcasts like this and writing a book and, writing articles and working with organizations. So it's, as consumers, yeah, we're free to make our own choices. We can do as we wish. But as individuals and working for organizations, if presented with the opportunity, I mean, maybe it would be a good idea to go work at Facebook, because then you can sort of, you can be a positive force affecting the culture. You're not joining the empire. You're adjusting the empire.
Actually, something I wanted to add. So for these big companies, right, for these major corporations, you think that because there are so many different moving parts, so many different individual interests, that it's sort of harder to enact change? Or is that just a misconception, just something, because I haven't given it much thought. That's just sort of a surface level.
Yeah, you're saying that like it's too big picture, right? Or it could be.
For instance, let's say, okay, so we'll also move away from Facebook, just because it was used as an example before.
Pile on Facebook.
Yeah, sure. So, like you said, Ryan, there's a group of individuals that are coming to decisions, right? It's not necessarily the entity of Facebook. We have to sort of zoom out and try to be nuanced about this and look at who's making these decisions. So do you feel like maybe there are some people that do want to enact some kind of positive change, but because it's such a huge corporation, it's not as easy as one would think?
Right.
So I have friends that work there, and I have found it to be an environment where actually ideas are welcome and shared, and they are encouraged. And so, but yeah, like to your point, moving away from Facebook and just saying, generally speaking, at organizations, it can be overwhelming to enact change. Yes. So I think you, as an employee, you ultimately have to realize you're salaried. And the reason why you're salaried is because you're doing a job. And the reason why you're doing that job is probably to help the company be profitable in some way, shape, or form. So it goes back to sort of managing interest as well. It's like, okay, so understanding my role here is to do X or Y, but what are some things that I can do that maybe align with the company's best interest, but also align with my own values and the broader values of the organization and then maybe the community in which we serve. So, okay, I work for a cereal manufacturer that uses a chemical product in the cereal that really isn't great for people to eat. Well, all right, I understand that my job here working for the cereal manufacturer is that we need to make food for people to ingest and that we need to make a profit doing so. But maybe I can think about ways to change the ingredients so that we're not poisoning our customers. It's just, that's a really simplistic example, but you can, if you align just think about aligning interests. Okay, so what is the motivation of the company? What's my motivation? What do I want? How do I want to bridge the gap here and bring these two together? And what can I do to see my values align with the company's interests?
All right, I got to ask you a tough question, man. So,
go ahead.
All right. So now imagine, you're working for a company that's not Facebook, and you're trying to implement changes. It's not working out. Are you then ethically responsible and obligated to quit?
You are not ethically responsible to quit, because you might need to put food on the table, and you're probably more ethically responsible for eating than you are to where you work. So I would say that if there are folks who work at organizations and work in environments that are just horrific workplace environments, but they do it because they need to pay rent, they have kids, they need, pick your reasoning. But ultimately, we make sacrifices, perhaps for loved ones, for our own safety and stability. And so there is no ethical obligation to quit your job. I think there's a superior ethical obligation to put food on the table for your son or daughter. Like that probably, I think that trumps where you work. So one of the more meaningful sections, though, I think, of the book, we talk about Professor Bertrand, Marion Bertrand, who gave this speech at U Chicago during a convocation speech. And she said that you have the ability to vote with your feet, though. So if you please enact change, try to enact positive change, try to create a difference in the world. And if you work for an organization that lies, cheats, steals, and doesn't behave in an ethical way, then please vote with your feet and leave and do something else. Now, of course, we all don't have the ability to vote with our feet. There's just the reality that some folks, if you work on Amazon's production line, maybe it's the job that you need to have, and you're so grateful for the job, and that's where you work, and that's where it's a stable paycheck, and that's okay. And if you're unhappy there, maybe there's other ways in which you can sort of manage your experience. If quitting is just not an option, working with a therapist, working with mental health partners, talking to colleagues, maybe working with managers, whatever that might look like. But no, the short answer to the question is you are not ethically obligated to quit. There are larger obligations that you might have that would necessitate you staying in that role.
Right.
But if you are part of an organization that lies, cheats, steals, as Dr. Bertrand said, and you have the ability to quit and you have the freedom and flexibility to do so, well, then it's probably a matter of reflection and thinking about whether or not this is an organization you want to continue working for. It's not a statement about you that you work there, but it is certainly a conversation to be had. And if you have the ability to vote with your feet and you realize your company's doing something wrong, and you can't change it from within, and you can't positively shift the course, then sure, absolutely, you have the ability to leave.
Right. So I think what you're saying is that in terms of nuance, we're going up the totem pole. So the people at the bottom, we would be understanding, and we would say, let's say somebody who works at a warehouse, like, yeah, if you can't quit, I mean, obviously this is probably the only game in town. I mean, for a lot of towns, Amazon is probably the high or the biggest employer. Whereas opposed to, let's say, somebody being upper management, and, if they have like, an MBA and God knows how many items on their resume, and the idea is like, you can walk away. Yeah, you should, as a community, we need you to do that.
But going back to your point from earlier, right? You'd rather enact change.
No,
from
but I'm saying if you
within
can't. I'm saying if you can't.
Oh, if you
Yeah,
can.
if you can, if you
I see.
legitimately have that. So if it doesn't align with your values and you've tried as hard as you could, and now the idea is, you're kind of staying put when you don't necessarily need to be, I think that person is responsible for that.
So. Yeah, and I by and large, are there companies out there that lie, cheat, steal, poison the well? Absolutely. Yeah. By and large, it's not a majority of them. I mean, I really have not found. Look, I work with companies, and there are a couple of organizations that we probably wouldn't work for, given what I don't want to share them, but we've talked to a couple in the past where I just wouldn't feel comfortable working for them, given sort of what their line of work. But by and large, companies are not lying, cheating, stealing, and they might engage in questionable behavior at times, but the sort of idea of the Scrooge McDuck corporation, it's a bit of a stereotype, and it's not always accurate. I mean, the vast majority of businesses are small businesses or family businesses, and so like my friend who owned a bakery, like, was she lying, cheating, and stealing by opening a bakery? Like the vast majority of companies out there are not the ones you hear about in the news by a long shot, and so. All in all, I think the companies are trying to do right in their own special way. They're trying to do right by their employees and by their customers, because ultimately that helps them be more successful. And Think, Talk, Create is just a way to further that success.
Yeah. And so this might be surprising to you, but actually Think, Talk, Create was not the most important idea for me in the book. So for me, actually, the most important one was a little bit, I guess it was sort of hidden, but I mean, not really, because you touched on it a few times, but I love this idea. So it kind of blew me away, but it was honestly kind of another one of those things that sort of like seemed obvious, but I was like, oh, wow, I never thought of it that way. We should. So the idea of the stakeholder, right? So all of us think about stakeholders as just literally people who own stocks in the company, or, obviously stocks or shares or whatever. So the idea there is that we think of stakeholders as like, this person has X% of ownership of the companies. The way you framed it is that you actually broaden the concept of stakeholders. So it's not just people who own the company, right? It's more. So actually, can you explain that for us? I'd rather you tell us.
Yeah. So going back, so if I'm the person who goes to the store, buys the cereal that has the chemical in it, and I eat it and I die, I have a stake in the company because that company just killed me. Right. So stakeholders are anyone who has a vested interest in the organization. So that is financial investors, so shareholders, absolutely, no question. Employees, because they get their livelihood from this organization. Customers, because they're the ones who are using the products and services. The community, because they're housing this. So if you're poisoning the well in the community and people are drinking the water, that's a problem as well. So stakeholders are basically anybody who has an interest in the company's well-being and behavior. So if we sort of broaden that scope and we think about, well, I'm a stakeholder in a lot of companies now, if I really think about what organizations affect me. And so it changes our commitment and, I guess, level of responsibility and interest in organizations, and it moves it away from, oh, I'm invested in this company financially, therefore I care, but if I'm not invested in the company, I don't care. Okay, but if you're using their product and the product poisoning you, you still should care. So it's a stakeholder idea is that, it's if you're anybody that has a toe in the company pool, then you should care.
Yeah, like technically, I am a stakeholder in Dunkin' Donuts because
absolutely,
if they give me shit coffee, I mean, it's going to hurt me, right? Whether physically, emotionally, or both.
Sure. Mostly emotionally, probably.
Mostly emotionally. I'll be like, what the hell? I just wasted like $3 on this garbage.
Exactly.
All right. So before we wrap up, Alan, any final questions for Ryan, man?
Yeah. If we wanted to follow you, follow your work, where could we find you?
So a good place to start is our website, strategyofmind.com. That's where you can find our professional services. But I've been active on social media, so you can find me on Instagram at Ryan J. Stelzer. I'm also, believe it or not, I know that this is going to be sacrilegious, I'm on TikTok as well. Sacrilegious for the folks who are like, why is that guy on TikTok? But you can look for me on TikTok, at Ryan Stelzer, and follow some videos. We do some funny bits for marketing. I'm on Twitter as well. And lastly, LinkedIn. I write the Think Talk Create newsletter for LinkedIn. So if you're interested in keeping up with the ideas, just subscribe. It's free. I publish an article every couple of weeks, and it's a fun way to stay engaged.
Absolutely. And then, so I think honestly, man, your TikTok is one of the best TikToks that I mean, look, I'm not that active on TikTok, just, to be clear, but it's one of the, out of all of the people that we do follow, because we have a page there together.
Can you share the one that you were talking about before we started recording?
Yeah. So there's the great one with you, with you and like the club and the dance club. And so where you end up giving the guy the audiobook version of TikTok Create, right, to play for the club. That was really great, man. And so like the fact that you guys can come up with these dope ideas, that's really cool, because usually when people think of these kind of works, they think philosophy, they think stuffiness, and some dude in an armchair. But the thing is with you guys, you're pretty much bringing this into the practical world, whether through comedy and obviously whether through like workshops and just collaborations, where the idea is that you kind of see that these ideas not only have merit again in the real world in terms of like collaboration, but they can also be funny too.
And I got to say, I actually own both the physical copy of the book and the audiobook.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I go between both of them. Sometimes if I'm just laying down, I just want to relax, I'll listen to the audiobook.
Mm-hmm.
Or if I'm just sitting somewhere here, I'll start to read. So.
Yeah. And then, by the way, Ryan, man, this was probably, I would say, top 5, top 3, one of the best books I read this year, man.
I really appreciate it. That's very kind of you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely,
means a
man.
lot.
Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me, guys.
Absolutely, man. Talk to you soon.
Take care.
All right. That was awesome.
Yeah, that was really fun.
All right, everybody. If you want to follow us at Seize the Moment Podcast on Facebook and on Instagram, and at Seize_podcast on Twitter. Like, subscribe, hit the bell. And thank you so much for watching, and see you next time.